So, this upcoming Sunday is Palm Sunday, or sometimes called the Liturgy of the Palm Branches. This is the beginning of what is often called Holy Week, the week that is leading up to Easter. So, 1 week away from Easter, we're quite at the close to the end of Lent. And many different church traditions take this week to kind of rehearse, to retell the story of Jesus' last week on earth, or last amount of time on earth, before he was both killed and then resurrected. And so there's kind of a set pattern of worship services, of practices that people have used for a long time to kind of retell this story. And it's interesting because if today is Palm Sunday is very much about theater. It's very much about kind of ritual and Jesus doing something publicly to demonstrate, as this entire week is, just as Jesus is going to be kind of disputing, how people understand what God is and what the meaning of some of those rituals and things are. So, kind of the traditional. The kind of traditional way of celebrating this Holy Week is, again, as I said, the first Sunday is Palm Sunday, when we celebrate Jesus going triumphantly into Jerusalem in full state and full of claims of being Messiah. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second. And then in Jesus' real ministry, he spent kind of the rest of the week first making this very dramatic symbol of condemning kind of the current temple practices, saying they were not leading to people to God, ongoing disputes. And then a couple other big highlights that are kind of traditionally done during Holy Week is on Thursday, we do what's called Maundy Thursday. Maundy itself is from the Latin word for commandment, because that is the beautiful passage in John in which Jesus says, I give you this new commandment, in Latin, this new Maundy or mandatum or something like that. I give you this new commandment to love one another, and let me show you what that is actually all about. And he does this incredibly degrading act of a servant of washing their gross Middle Eastern sandaled feet, right? And so this new commandment, this humility and service as a form of love, is something we emphasize on Thursday, on Maundy Thursday. Friday is called Good Friday. Good Friday is when we celebrate, is when we acknowledge, maybe is a better word than celebrate, what Jesus actually had to go through on the cross. The fact that Jesus, was unjustly accused, that he was beaten, that he was murdered politically on a horrible, torturous cross for the sake of all of humanity. And then, so a lot of the time, Good Friday services are going to emphasize that story, that passion. It's a very dark one, and that marks the end of Lent officially, is Good Friday. On Saturday, on Holy Saturday, two things tend to happen. One is sometimes churches will meet and have kind of this weird between day, because that's the day when Jesus was in the ground. But the kind of the fullest, the most traditional way of doing it was people would actually start the church service in the evening at sundown, going into Sunday. And in many traditions, including Russian Orthodoxy, they still do this. People would then have this kind of watching and waiting service through the night, and Easter morning would start at sunrise. And so there's these traditional emphases that they would do in readings and readings throughout the night. The first is Jesus as light. And then another is just kind of God's story throughout history. So talking about the Exodus, talking about the way Jesus healed people and touched people, and the whole story of exile, etc., that we talk about in worship as well. And then that morning, what people would often do is, as the sun came up, that's when new people were baptized, when they were symbolically joined with both Jesus' death during the dark and his resurrection again as the sun came out. And then they would celebrate Eucharist, the kind of ongoing sustenance of it for the first time. And so this was overall called the Great Vigil of Easter, the Great Watching for Easter. And so it's a beautiful symbol, and one that I don't think many of us are able to participate in. Obviously, I wish we could do all these worship services in their fullness. They're beautiful services, they're beautiful reminders. But at Wayfarers, that's just not the life stage most of us are at. It's not the spaces we have. We do not have big, beautiful spaces. I guess we're for misfits. We're for a little more normal people. We're for just kind of a scrappy little church. And so we need to remind ourselves that this week, people were retelling this story about Jesus, both his sacrificial love, his desire to tell us to love one another, and to watch and wait to see what God is up to in the world as well. So I think that's the invitation of Holy Week, to recognize again that we need to tell this story, and to figure out what can this story look like for each of us. So that's kind of what's upcoming with Holy Week, getting into Easter. But let's look again. It is Palm Sunday, and so we're going to read all the Gospels tell this story of Jesus going into Jerusalem. And this year we're going to read Luke's description of it. So I'm going to start in Luke chapter 19, verse 29. As Jesus came to Bethphage and Bethany, to the Mount of Olives, he gave 2 disciples a task. He said, "Go into the village over there, and when you enter it, you will find that there is a colt that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If someone asks, 'Why are you untying it?' just say, 'Its master needs it.'" Those who had been sent found it exactly as he said to them. As they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they replied, "Its master needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their clothes on the colt, and lifted Jesus onto it. As Jesus rode along, they spread their clothes on the road. As Jesus approached the road leading down from the Mount of Olives, the whole throng of his disciples began rejoicing. They praised God with a loud voice because of the mighty things that they had seen, and they said, "Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heavens." Some of the Pharisees from the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, scold your disciples. Tell them to stop." And he answered, "I tell you, if they were silent, the stones would shout." So as I said, all 4 Gospels tell this important story. And one of the things I think is most important for us to recognize is that up until this point, Jesus has not been very comfortable kind of claiming this title, claiming this role of Messiah, of the expected coming king. And usually I think that is because people had such set ideas of what the Messiah was supposed to be that Jesus didn't want to claim the baggage that came with their understanding of that term. He wants to continually redefine in a lot of ways what is the meaning of that term. And so each of the Gospels is going to kind of emphasize this in different ways. So Luke's telling is a little bit different than Matthew's, which really emphasizes kind of the fickleness of the crowd, that this was a big event that everyone recognized and was excited about, and yet those same people are going to be crucifying Jesus within a few short days. So some of Luke's interests that he's gonna bring out here is one that Jesus is very interested in kind of defining what it is he does as Messiah, like I said, but also what is the kingdom? What is it that God values? Who is included in that? Luke is, of course, the one that includes such famous parables like the prodigal son, right? And other miracle stories that emphasize Jesus recognizes what God is up to and wants to redefine some of the ways they do that. And so we see that some here in the story, that Jesus comes as a Messiah, but on a donkey, coming in peace to the royal city. That the reference that he makes to the stones crying out is a reference from Zechariah, in which before the kind of destruction comes because people won't listen to God, the stones themselves cry out because justice is not being done. That quick response, again, shows Jesus is not interested just in power and in kicking butt, but in remaking things because people are not listening and are not obedient. And so right after the story, Jesus will go in and challenge those who are running the temple, saying, "You are doing this wrong. You are not leading people to God through this ritual and through this place. You are using it to benefit yourself, and teach them things that are wrong about my Father." And so again, even in this story, Jesus is trying to redefine what a king is, what God is like, what the point of the temple, all of those things are. And the way Luke tells the story kind of brings out some of those big themes. Another kind of similar idea is Luke is very interested in the fact that God is not just redefining the symbols and ways of being, but God is interested in kind of remaking the entire world. That can give us kind of an apocalyptic edge to it. And again, he mentions that this starts out coming down the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives was a kind of a hill with some gardens and things on it that was similar, or that was close to Jerusalem. But there's a lot of language in the Old Testament pointing out that towards the end of time, God is going to be doing some things there. And so he points that place out, showing that Jesus coming in as Messiah isn't just a political figure, he's also a spiritual figure, and that God is up to something new with this type of a Messiah, with the way he is here. Another emphasis that Luke has here, again, compared to Matthew, who is emphasizing kind of the crowds, and there's all sorts of people there, is he's pointing out that this is the majority of the people, whether it's at the Mount of Olives stage and maybe it picks up later or whatever, is the disciples. The disciples are here not just giving kind of a general praise, as we're going to hear from Matthew, but they're giving a very specific praise, one that echoes the exact words we heard from the angels earlier in Luke when they announced to shepherds what God was up to, right? Blessings on the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory from the highest heavens. And then it says again that the disciples praised God with a loud voice because of all the mighty things that they had been seeing. And so the way that Luke points out this story is those who put him on this donkey, who kind of start this procession, are disciples. They're people who are they're people who are trying to follow Christ and figure out what he's up to. Just we're going to realize throughout the course of this story is they don't really understand the significance of what it is God is doing in their midst. They're praising God for mighty acts. They have a sense that God is on the move. They just don't have a sense yet that this is actually heading towards not victory but the cross, and that the victory will be over sin and death in the resurrection itself. And so there's an invitation here, even in this story, that we as readers know this is not going to be just a triumph. This is not going to go well for Jesus. Those disciples who are so happy to praise God for the things he's up to aren't going to be there at the cross. They are going to fail, right? And so I think one of the big invitations in rehearsing this story, both for Palm Sunday and all of Holy Week, is, I think, kind of the question that Luke is wanting us to ask ourselves is, we are disciples. We are people who are celebrating that God has done some things in the world. And yet, at this point, are we willing not only to do the kind of showy, flamboyant, celebratory thing, right? Join the big parade thinking something good is coming. Are we willing to follow Jesus all the way, even if it takes us into trouble or controversy, trial, or death? Because I think one of the big points that all the Gospels are making, but Luke particularly, is that God's people, whether it's the culture around that has really been, 1,000 years or whatever it is, of God preparing people for this visit, for this moment, and missing it. Maybe it's the disciples, people who spent all this time with Jesus, who've been taught directly by him, who've seen what he's capable of, and they miss the significance of this moment, that God is coming among them to be betrayed, that God is coming among them to be misunderstood. And so I think Palm Sunday is beautiful in its irony, right? Whether it's the disciples, whether it's the crowd, people are thinking this is the beginning of something big and glorious, and we're just going to be there. And I think the way we can approach Easter as the American church can be the same thing. We want to skip the story in the middle. We want to get right back to the resurrection, to the part when God is at work and doing beautiful things and life is coming out of death. We should be celebrating those things. But we can't celebrate the meaning of resurrection. We can't claim we're actually disciples willing to follow Christ unless we are willing to follow him into trouble as well, unless we are willing to go and take up our cross, as Jesus described discipleship itself. And so I just think it's a beautiful week to remember our calling, because what I like about this passage is the disciples have seen and noticed what God is up to, right? It says they're praising his mighty acts. The invitation from Jesus here for each of us every Holy Week is most of God's people are going to miss it. We're going to try to skip ahead to the happy ending. We're not willing to follow into those places. So, going into Easter, going into Holy Week, will you follow me? Will you learn from me, both from the hard, difficult places, but as well from places of resurrection? So I think just a richer view of what Easter is and what it is we celebrate is the invitation through all of Holy Week, including Palm Sunday.